Hi, I'm Gavin Brelstaff from CRS4, the Sardinian Regional Research Centre. So, in normal times, this talk would constitute a local offering to the workshop, hosted together with the entire ACM IUI conference in Cagliari on the island of Sardinia. Cagliari is also the university where my co-author, Alexandra, is currently studying computing. Pertinently, she also has a degree in philosophy. The topic of our workshop, and in particular effective human-robot interaction, lies at a crossroads between a progressively developing technology and something altogether different and hard to satisfactorily express in technological terms, i.e. human feelings. Here we'll explore a new avenue towards doing just that. At the turn of the century, having long worked on the Kismet robot head, Cynthia Briaziel expressed an enduring goal of the work in Affective HRI, i.e. to support a rich and tightly coupled dynamic between robot and human, where each responds contingently to the other on an affective level. 20 or so years on, much technological progress has been achieved, although the goal, as depicted here by Ian McEwan's Machines Like Me, remains still a little far off. Let's have a look at the two halves of HRI, the human and the robot, expressing affect or emotion. The human exhibits and recognizes emotions, while the robot simulates and recognizes emotions. Both can be thought to having connectivities that compute what they do, even if one is wetware and the other is hardware. Let's say the robot has data plus algorithms, while the human has perceptual data plus algorithms. And the human may or may not have something extra. We seem to actually feel things, while robots might only be simulating them. Perhaps it's more symmetric than that, though. There are broadly two disciplinary approaches here. Those that look towards the mentalistic, psychological side of things in an expansive, interpretive way, and those that look at things in a materialistic, physical, algorithmic manner, applying our familiar scientific reductionist optimizing approach. As you might expect, we take the latter approach here, and in doing so adopt one of today's most detailed materialistic attempts to explain how it is that the bunch of cells called human beings happen to have a sense of self, and thus awareness, and thus effect, i.e. we adopt Dan Dennett's approach, which incorporates the idea that humans' progressive competencies are explainable in terms of layers of algorithmic substrates. Hey, isn't that how robots have been developing these days? This approach is most comprehensively expressed in Dan Dennett's most recent book, shown here on the left. Our table on the right shows the progression of competence upwards, starting at the bottom with Darwinian creatures that manifest representational learning and thus more efficiently represent the information available to them within their environment. Next, we have Skinnerian creatures that in addition deploy reinforcement learning to automatically optimize their behavior and so improve their survival over repeated occasions. Above them are Popperian creatures that furthermore embed Bayesian methods such as generating and testing hypothetical scenarios and so select the statistically most favorable outcome when faced with a limited number of possible actions. They thus famously survive, as Karl Popper put it, by letting their hypotheses die in their stead. Dennett makes a rather convincing case that creatures up to and including Popperians might just as well be considered as automata or robots, since their behavior is basically deterministic given the material environmental conditions. The pinnacle of such automated existence is manifest by the connectivities that carry out hierarchical Bayesian predictive coding. This effectively instantiates hypothesized objects within the computing individual in response to stimuli perceived in the environment. This object representation is key to the next stage, where objects can then become labeled nouns and then become communicated and shared with further selective advantage to the individuals. At the topmost level, we have Gregorian creatures, named after Professor Richard Gregory, with whom I had the pleasure of working at Bristol some time ago. He emphasized how tools are objects that inherently embody ideas that can be passed from person to person. Gregorian creatures are the ones who begin to share memes, have language, and thence acquire an explicit awareness of self. This emergent awareness is what Dennett and others before him call the user illusion. And if this user illusion is the extra that I talked about earlier, that humans have over robots, then the difference between exhibiting and simulating emotion may eventually dissolve, since emotions would simply constitute emergent features of complex interacting systems, and that could include sufficiently sophisticated robots. The user illusion arises, according to Dennett, for creatures that have the necessary algorithmic substrate, including the nested virtual machines that I listed on the previous slide, and arise through the trading of reasons between fellow creatures. These reasons will often be expressed in terms of the objects delivered to mind by predictive coding, as mentioned earlier. In particular, the practice of sharing information in communicative actions with others, giving and demanding reasons, is what creates our personal user illusions, as writes Dennett. In this scenario, effect is effectively projected onto the body rather than being derived from it. Well, this is all fine and believable, except that what about those of us for which giving and demanding reasons seems infeasible? Do we really deny the presence of awareness and thus effect in infants and those of us with, say, dementia? How might we be inclusive of such individuals while deviating as little as possible from Dennett's scientific reductionist path? Here we tentatively explore how we might begin to consider affect as a co-founding constituent rather than a mere projection of user illusions. Might each of us harbour proto-reasons grounded by specific effects, which duly elicit proto-user illusions? It would be great to establish such a grounding for those effects that HRI researchers most often aim to recognize, such as pain, hunger, fear, joy, etc. But let me try with a more basic effect. Touch. Could touch be a proto-reason that grounds awareness of a material reality comprising macroscopic solids? Might it duly elicit the proto-user illusion we term tactile sentience? How could that fit in with Dennett's progression? Slide 9. Well, let's see. This is a rather busy table extracted from another talk. At the bottom, we show how Dennett's progression can be aligned with stages of infant development. At the age of 2 or 3, a normal infant enters at the developmental stage that Piaget termed pre-operational, and thus begins to be a Gregorian creature. All okay for Dennett. But before that, in Piaget's sensor-motor stage, I've marked in red where proto-reasons and proto-user illusion might have an onset, occurring around the time of birth, conveying a nascent awareness. Here on this slide, I attempt to justify some details of the onset of nascent awareness. Together with the grounding and eliciting that I already sketched in particular, we have the instantiation of the Bayesian hyperprior in the predictive encoding substrate. As Clark pointed out, that is necessary to stipulate that no two macroscopic solids occupy the same physical space. This enforces a basic constraint on any computing network. This may be the beginning of spatial awareness and could be an ontological basis for a self in the world. Let's consider what is known as the phenomenal or phenomenological present. It constitutes the only venue for effect and awareness that any of us know. I've tried to draw it here at the top. Feelings are felt within a few milliseconds or so of the phenomenal present, represented by the circle, not earlier in the past nor further into the future, as I've represented along the line. In a sense, all science and technology has been conceived of in the phenomenal present. The phenomenal present is a moving window of opportunity that can be shared. Below I depict an encounter by overlapping the circles of two different individuals. They interact in the intersection either by trading reasons a la Dennett or by dynamic contingent affective interaction a la Brelstaff. So finally we reach the point, the impedance mismatch in the title of this work. Let's see how it goes. Antonio Damasio lets us consider awareness and feeling to exist in the resonant loop between body states and brain states, not just in the brain. Such a loop undoubtedly conveys quantitative sensory information to the brain, as perception is always being figured. Yet let us associate with such a loop a coupled, grounding sentience property or tuple that has a qualitative aspect that's been seeded early in life. Here we have, in effect, separated out a supposition of the quantitative sensory channel and its algorithmic connotations with an ostensibly non-algorithmic quality. And so we envisage the prospect of an impedance mismatch for effective HRI, whereby non-algorithmic qualities get pursued by robots on a purely algorithmic rational basis. That data plus algorithm in effective HRI that I mentioned right up the top in an earlier slide today is beginning to be stated in the form of deep learning algorithms trained on large labeled datasets of facial expressions and gestures, etc. This is a bit like predictive coding, where the expectation of that learned labeling will generalize even to those individuals that have no capacity to label. Here we have a duty to consider the limits of mechanistic algorithmic explanation. Indeed, it may remain prudent when developing future robotic caregivers and nurses to ensure that any such learnt labeling continues to be integrated into a wider context that includes a significant human interpretive element. So with effective HRI today, I have an example of the EPAT pain assessment tool. which it's heartening to see such a wider context being adopted in the development of a healthcare app that seeks to estimate pain on the faces of individuals with moderate to severe dementia. Thanks for giving me your attention. If you have been stimulated by the ideas in this talk, please get in touch with me on this email that I share right here, and hope to see you in the flesh sometime.